The whispering well? The forest stood still, except for the soft crunch of the leaves beneath Emma's boots. The moon rode low in the sky, a pale crescent casting ragged shadows across the bare limbs. She readjusted the strap of her backpack, her breath misting in the cool October air. A flashlight in Lucas's hand cast a thin slice of light into the darkness. They'd hiked for hours, following a rumor Emma overheard at the diner, an ancient well, deep in the forest, that would make a person's wishes come true. The locals referred to it as the Whispering Well, though no one knew why. "Are you certain of this?" Lucas questioned softly. His glasses sparkled as he looked at Emma. "It is getting late, and these woods aren't safe at night." Emma grinned scornfully even as her stomach turned. "You asked for an adventure, didn't you? And we're close. I just know it." Lucas sighed but didn't protest. He'd become accustomed to Emma's stubbornness. They'd known each other in high school and shared an interest in mysteries and ancient lore. Emma suggested a hike up the well at midnight because she claimed she'd heard that's when it glowed. Lucas had gone along with it, half as a challenge, half so she wouldn't go alone. Now, as the forest closed in around them, he second-guesses himself for not insisting they go in the morning. The path had disappeared an hour before, and they had been forced to follow by instinct and the amateurish map Emma had drawn from the diner gossip. The trees closed in on them more and more, their twisted branches creaking together like skeletal fingers. The air was thick with an unnatural silence, as if the forest itself was suspending its breath. Emma stood still, searching the shadows. "It should be around here somewhere," she half spoke aloud. "Or perhaps we're lost," Lucas said, swinging the flashlight. The light hit something in the distance, a glint of something moist as wet stone. "Wait! What is that?" Emma tracked the light. And there, in a little clearing nestled among the trees, was a low circle of stones, half overgrown with greenery. The well. It was smaller than she'd pictured it, not even wide enough for a body to get through, its edges smoothed by the passing of time. The ground around it lay empty, as if no plant dared grow near. A soft mist curled around the stones, even though the night air was clear. They inched forward, the hush between them thickening. Lucas directed the light into the well, but the light appeared to struggle against the darkness below. "That's strange," he frowned. "It should illuminate something." Emma knelt next to the well, running her fingers over the moss-covered stones. They felt cold, abnormally cold, and slick with moisture that felt more like sweat than dew. She stood closer, looking into the dark, empty space. "Hello?" she said softly, half laughing. Her voice rebounded back, but not the way it ought. The sound returned twisted and layered, as if several voices had replied. Lucas took hold of her arm. "Don't do that," he growled. "I'm getting the heebie-jeebies just being in." "Relax," Emma instructed, even as her heart raced. She reached into her pocket and took out a penny she carried with her for good luck. "The legend is that you make a wish and throw something in. Let's give it a shot." "Emma, no." He tried to stop her, but she dropped the coin. It descended silently, no splash nor even a clink announcing its landing. The next sound was silence, thick and heavy against their ears. Then, soft and far away, a whisper arose from the well. It was a soft movement of air through dry leaves and then grew louder and began taking on the forms of words that each of them couldn't possibly decipher. The voices crossed one another, insistent, begging, angry. Emma retreated, her toughness lost. "What was that?" Lucas shook his head and his face turned white. "I don't know, but we have to go. Now." The whispers deepened, louder and more biting, as if debating among themselves. Emma's skin crawled, and she knew the air had grown cooler, the mist more dense. The flashlight quivered, the light faltering. Lucas pulled her toward the trees, but the clearing shifted before them, the path they had walked obscured by darkness. The whispering began to follow them no longer within the well. It emanated from the trees, the ground, the air around them, encircling like hunters. Emma's breath caught. "Lucas, what's going?" He did not respond, his eyes wide as he wildly swung the flashlight around. The light hit snatches of movement, figures that darted just on the edge of the light, too quick to discern. They were not human, not really, but they moved with intent. The whispering increased into a murmur, the words remaining cryptic but full of a hunger that made Emma's heart constrict. They dashed along, branches scratching against their clothes, the earth below irregular beneath their feet. The well behind them still cast its weight over them. The whispers pursued them, running between trees, now stringing together half sentences. "Stay. Listen. Ours." Emma's legs ached with a burning sensation, her lungs heaving, but she couldn't stop running. Ahead of her, Lucas moved rapidly with his flashlight a mere glow among the encroaching fog. They burst into a second clearing, panting, and froze. The well stood there before them, just the same as the one they had abandoned, its stones reflecting the light of the moon. "No," Lucas breathed softly. "It cannot be." Emma's knees became weak. The whisperings grew louder still, and the darkness between the trees creaked forward, its edges twitching like yellow smoke. The well pulsed with a deeper darkness than the night around it. Something moved towards them, something primordial and unhurried, and it knew their names. Emma's heart pounded as she gazed into the well, its stones the same as the one that they had escaped. It glowed with a bilious light in the moon's rays, the moss resembling veins that crawled across the rock. Lucas stood statue still beside her, his flashlight shaking in his hand. The whispers continued. They swirled around the glade, a cacophony of voices that appeared not to emanate from any one place, and all of them. "It can't be happening," Lucas breathed. "We escaped. We left it behind." Emma made herself breathe, the air thick as if breathing in damp fabric. "Perhaps the well is somewhere else," she lied. The clearing was identical, even to the empty ground and the mist creeping around their boots. The shadows among the trees moved closer in the light of the lanterns cast by the fires that danced on the ground. She felt their eyes, cold and fixed as needles against her skin. "We have to go," she told Lucas as she took his arm. "Come on." He nodded, but kept his eyes on the well as if it drew him in. She pulled harder, and he lurched behind her, the flashlight flickering once more. They dashed back into the forest, the branches smacking into their faces. The voices continued behind them, relentless, their pitch changing from plea to command. Words began to make sense. "Look. See. Stay." Every syllable made Emma's spine tingle, as if the voices penetrated her head. The forest closed in on them, the ground uneven with roots bursting up like pitfalls. Emma got her pack stuck on a thorn and pulled it free, her fingers trembling. Lucas had a sheen of sweat on his glasses, his breathing ragged. "It's not right," he panted. The forest dotted shifting. Emma did not want to believe him but knew she felt it too. The trees loomed closer, the branches more knotted, the forest encroaching around them like a clenched fist. The moonlit glows barely penetrated the ground anymore, and the light of the flashlight faltered, casting only a few feet of light before them. She attempted to concentrate on moving forward, on finding an exit, but the voices were a continuous soundtrack over top of all her thoughts. They entered another clearing, and Emma's stomach fell. The well stood there once more, its stones shining, the mist more thick and writhing upwards like tendrils. Lucas uttered a strangled noise and let go of the flashlight. It crashed into the ground and extinguished itself, leaving them in near darkness. The whispers erupted into the silence, and the darkness flowed closer along the periphery of the clearing, its forms dancing like flame. No, 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 Lucas muttered, taking a step back. It's not happening. Emma clasped his shoulders tightly, compelling him to meet her eyes. Lucas, stay with me. We have to work this out. Figure what out? He growled, his voice cracking. We're stuck. Why is it following us all the time? She longed to argue with it, to find a logical answer, but the well stood there, its existence proven. It wasn't a building, it felt alive, its darkness throbbing like a heart. The voices increased in a cacophony of urgency. Emma. Lucas. Hear us. She put her hands over her ears, but the voices within her head felt cold and jagged as shards of glass. Lucas knelt on the ground, his fingers wrapped around his hair. What do they want? He breathed. Emma wasn't aware of anything, yet she couldn't eliminate the sense that the well was keeping an eye on them, patiently waiting. She willed herself forward, her legs shaking. The stones felt colder now, the moss more slippery, and the air near the well felt thick against her. She stared into the darkness, half hoping to see something staring back. Absolute darkness swallowed even the meager moonlight. But then, indistinctly, she noticed movement, a ripple, as if water below had been stirred. Lucas, look, she told him, her voice trembling. He crawled toward me, his face white. What is it? I don't know. It appears. Something is down there. He canted forward over the brink, and the whispers reached a crescendo, a cacophony of voices screaming. Lucas recoiled in horror, his eyes wide with fear. I saw it, he panted. Eyes. There were eyes down there. Emma's blood turned cold. She hadn't actually witnessed anything, but the fear in Lucas's voice sent shivers running down her spine. The shadows along the edge of the clearing drew near, their shapes more distinct, all long and slender with unnatural limbs that twisted into impossible positions. They moved not like people, but glided with blurred edges that merged with the mist. The whisperings were a cacophony of sound. See. No. Ours. Emma tugged on Lucas's hand, pulling him up from the ground. We're not going to stay here. We need to get out of here. They ran once more, the forest a labyrinth of shadows and voices. The well waited in each clearing, its stones identical each time, its darkness more profound with each repetition. Emma's thoughts careened wildly, attempting to find a pattern, a way out. The voices wore her down relentlessly, and they told her things in half-remembered snatches of memories, fears from her childhood, nightmares of Lucas's past that he had never told her. The shadows kept pace with her, their forms becoming more defined, their faces blank but somehow known. They fell into another clearing with the well standing before them. Emma's energy waned, her mind clouded by the whispers. Lucas shook, his eyes far away. The shadows moved in a silence, their proximity a weight that compressed the air from her chest. The well vibrated with its darkness, its depths pulling at her with a calling that hit her with a wrenching realization that it wasn't a well. It was a door, and something beyond the door struggled to pass. The well appeared to breathe as the darkness filled with each beat of the whispers. Emma knelt on the ground, her fingers holding the earth as if it might ground her. Lucas sat next to her, his back against a tree, his expression blank. The shadows around the clearing had coalesced into forms that looked disturbingly human but moved erratically, as if on frayed strings. The whispers had faded into the background but were no less unnerving, winding in and out of Emma's head like threads that tugged on memories she had no desire to access. Emma, Lucas spoke in a hollow voice. They're inside my head. They're showing me things. She gazed at him, her chest constricting. His eyes were unfocused as he looked at something she couldn't see. What things? She questioned, though she wasn't anxious for the response. Places. People. Me, but not me. It is as if I am someone else, somewhere else. He shook. And the well. It is ever present. Emma felt her skin crawl. The whispers were doing the same thing to her, raising up moments of her past, a funeral for her mother, an empty house, periods of sleeplessness as she cowered in the dark. But there were other images as well, images that belonged to someone else, a village center, unfamiliar faces, and the well again, its stones shining under a different sky. The voices were speaking in languages she couldn't decipher, but their intentions were clear. They told her that they wanted her to see, hear, give up. She crawled towards the well, searching frantically for answers. The stones chilled her more now, the moss running like water between her fingers. She crouched low, peering into the emptiness. The ripples grew more powerful, as if something enormous lurked below. The whispers grew more intense, and for an instant she saw it, a face, the implication of one, its features indistinct but its eyes piercing, fixed on hers. She drew back in shock, her heart thudding. "Lucas, there is something beneath us," she added in a shaking voice. "It's alive." He remained silent. She moved to stand up, turning towards the well, which he stood facing with a tilted head as though listening. "Lucas?" She stood up. "What are you doing?" "They want us to behold," he whispered. "They have been expecting." The shadows closed in closer, their faces becoming reflections of people Emma recognized. Her mom, her former teachers, friends she hadn't laid eyes on in years. But their eyes weren't right, too bright, too hollow. The voices increased in sound, a chant they used that beat in time with the wells pulsing. Emma reached for Lucas's arm, but he pushed her away from him with a sudden surge of power. "Lucas, snap out of it!" she shouted. He turned toward her, and for an instant, his eyes weren't his. They resembled the ones she'd witnessed in the well, cold, bottomless, ravenous. Then he blinked, and he was Lucas once more, perplexity marring his expression. "Emma? What is happening to me?" She tugged him back from the well, her hands trembling. "We have to fight against this. Whatever is below in the well is attempting to get into us." Their shadows hissed, the shapes shifting. The voices screamed into a chant of words piling up on one another. "Look! Join! Forever!" Emma's head pounded, the voices tearing in her mind. She saw glimpses of other lives, other moments, a woman with a bonnet, a man with a lantern, all around the well, all listening to the same voices. They had looked and they had disappeared into the darkness. "We have to block it out," Emma replied, trembling. She clasped his hand. "Stay with me. With us. We're both here, in the moment." He nodded, but his skin was white and his breathing shallow. The shadows crept closer in, their faces contorting into Emma and Lucas themselves, their own faces twisted into looks of desperation. The well pulsed more quickly, the air thudding with its beat. Emma felt it tugging on her, a tide washing over the edge toward her. She struggled against it, but the struggle took all her energy, like resisting sleep after many sleepless days. They walked away from the well, the forest curving around them. The trees closed in, their branches caging them. The whispers persisted, incessant, and the shadows kept up pace with them, their bodies taking shape, reaching out with hands. Emma's legs ached, her lungs burned, but she pushed on. Lucas was slowing up, his pace wobbly, his eyes glancing towards the well as if pulled towards it. They arrived in an empty space, and the well stood there, its stones shining, its darkness more profound than before. Emma's glimmer of hope faltered. "It is not working," she panted. "It is not releasing us." Lucas fell to the floor, his hands over his ears. "They're too loud," he said softly. They're telling me to look. To jump? No! Emma crouched beside him, her voice vehement. You're not doing that. We're leaving this place together. The shadows closed in around her, their fingers tracing along her skin, cold and ethereal. The whispers grew into a tempest and the well into an emptiness that looked like it extended farther than the ground, farther even than the world. Emma heard it calling out her name, offering answers, offering peace. She shook her head, crying. She wasn't going to give up. Not yet. As she gazed into Lucas's eyes, however, she saw the resignation there. The well had the advantage, and the night wasn't anywhere near over. Emma's fingers shook as she pressed them against Lucas's face, compelling him to look into her eyes. His eyes were far away, with the same unnatural radiance that had appeared in the well. The shadows closed in around them, their shapes already defined, their faces a twisted mockery of all they had ever loved. The voices were a never-ending current, beating against Emma's head, compelling her to look into the well, to yield to its siren call. The mist closed around them, the earth throbbing with the cadence of the well, as if the forest itself belonged to its energy. Lucas, remain with me, Emma begged, her voice cracking. You can battle this. He blinked and a glimmer of recognition hit him, but not for long. It is so loud, Emma, he breathed. It understands everything that I'm frightened of. The shadows hissed against her arms with a cold touch as they reached out with their hands. She winced but kept her grip on Lucas. The well lay just a few feet from them, its darkness a hole that warped the air around it. The ripples she glimpsed earlier ran stronger now, and the whispers brought images with them, glimpses of people standing over the well's edge, mouths twisted in terror or rapture as they crept forward and disappeared. The well hungered, and it had fed for centuries. Emma's thoughts flew in circles. They couldn't continue running. The forest wouldn't relinquish them. The well surfaced in each clearing, a steady, indefatigable force. She had to grasp it, find a way of escaping its influence. She stood up, dragging Lucas with her, though he moved with reluctance, as if bound to the well with intangible threads. Tell me, she instructed, speaking in a firm voice that concealed her trepidation. Tell me what you see. Perhaps we can determine what is behind it. Lucas swallowed hard, his eyes jumping back towards the well. It's revealing. A room. My boyhood bedroom. I'm hiding under the bed, but there's something in the house. It's approaching. He shivered. Then it's the well and I'm standing here, but I'm not me. I'm someone else and I'm falling. Emma's stomach nodded. The whispers twisted her as well, her terrors knitted into visions, a dark corridor, her mother's voice in a room that wasn't there, and always the well, waiting. But there was one thing more, something in the pattern of the visions. The individuals she saw, the ones that fell, they all peered into the well before they collapsed. They heard and they succumbed. Do not look, she told Lucas, turning him away from the well. It is attempting to deceive us. It is tricking us with our own memories. The shadows tittered, a cacophony of breaking glass. Their faces changed, and Emma and Lucas stood before them as children, their eyes empty. The voices chanted, See. Become. Ours. Emma's head pounded with the voices tearing into her resolve. She felt the pull of the well, a promise of rest, of knowing everything. It was tempting, so tempting, to simply look, to let go. She shook her head, her eyes locked on Lucas. We have to do something it doesn't anticipate, she told him. Something that stops the cycle. Like what? He asked, his voice weak. Emma wasn't aware of it, but she recalled the coin that she tossed into the well. It had not fallen with a sound, but this nightmare began with it. Perhaps the well required something of them, an offering, a sacrifice. Perhaps the matter of providing that bound them. She reached into her pocket again. Her hand closed around a second coin, a quarter this time. I'm going to give something a try, she said. Lucas seized her wrist. Don't. You saw what occurred the last time. I know, she replied softly. We can't just stay on the run. Trust me. She stepped up to the well, the shadows parting slightly as if interested. The whispers rolled forward, a tide of approval and warning. She stood with the coin on the brink of the well, her hand trembling. If you're listening, she declared, her voice ringing in the silence. We don't want your wishes. We don't want you. Leave us alone. She let the coin fall, and a sound resulted, a soft, hollow clink as if it had landed against something hard far below. The whispering ceased, the hush so abrupt that it was overwhelming. The shadows halted in place, their faces empty. The beat of the well slowed as the ripples cleared. For an instant, Emma permitted herself to believe. Then the earth lurched, a low throb that pushed her back. The whispers came back, but not as voices but as a single shriek that left her ears howling. The shadows reached out, grabbing for her clothing, her hair. Lucas screamed, tugging her away from them, and they escaped, the forest exploding around them. Trees creaked, breaking their moorings and shooting up from the ground, and the mist closed in around them. They entered into a second clearing, the well standing there, its stones cracked open and the moss bleeding a dark oily substance. The shadows filled all the space, their forms not human but something older, something that had never lived. The scream turned into words. You cannot go. You belong to us. Emma's energy was spent, her body numb. Lucas stood on shaky legs, his face pale. The darkness of the well beckoned an oblivion of nothingness, and a part of her wanted to succumb, wanted the struggle to end. But she turned a glance towards Lucas, saw the terror in his eyes, and knew that she couldn't let this happen this way. We refuse you, she screamed, her throat raw. We won't even look. We won't even listen. The cry escalated into a shriek as the shadows encroached and the well throbbed, its darkness projecting towards them as if a hand. The darkness of the well appeared to breathe, its borders dissolving as the world around them began to unravel. Emma and Lucas stood with their backs against each other, the darkness around them closing in like a noose. The shriek of the well was unbearable, a howling that resonated within their bones and shredded their sanity. The darkness was not a mimic of friends' faces. It was amorphous, its borders twisting like a coil of smoke, its eyes burning with an inferno of light. The forest disappeared as a vacuum took its place around the well's resting spot, its stones the one reality within a sea of nothing but darkness. Emma's body hurt, her mind tattered by the incessant whispers that returned once more, one deep and age-old voice speaking directly into her soul. You cannot fight it, it declared. You belong with us. Lucas shook with terror, his breathing haggard, his hands wrapped around her own with such ferocity that they hurt. She felt him slipping away from her, his resolve crumbling before the well's barrage. We need to stop it, Emma replied quietly over the howl. We cannot allow it to succeed. How? He demanded, his eyes wild. It's all around. It's inside us. She had no answer for it, but knew running wasn't an option anymore. The well had trapped not just them in the forest but within its world as well, a world in which time and space warped at its convenience. The vision she had there, the people that had passed before them, the lives taken by it, all these had been warnings but clues as well. They had all looked, all heard, and all fallen. Emma wasn't going to follow them. She reached toward the well, the darkness there a whirlpool now, its faces and hands and bodies indistinct. The voice boomed louder, promising eternity and power and secrets. It understood all of her doubts and terrors and used them as a fabric of enticement. But Emma realized the truth. The well wasn't giving, it was taking. Lucas, she told him, squeezing his hand. We have to refuse it. Not with words alone, but with all that we are. It thrives on our fright, our inquisitiveness. We have to give it nothing. He nodded, his eyes haunted, his face white. I'm doing my best, he whispered. It's just too powerful. The shadows convulsed forth, their forms condensing into one body, a giant figure that towered over the well. It had a face of nothingness but eyes that glowed like twin stars blazing into Emma's psyche. It passed no thoughts within her mind but instead used the air around her, shaking the earth beneath her feet. Look, it ordered. Become. Emma's knees collapsed under the weight of its will. Lucas dropped beside her, his hands over his eyes. The whirlpool of the well pulled faster, its physical force tugging them towards the lip. Emma felt her vision blur as the world around her turned into the darkness of the well. She saw herself plummeting downwards, saw Lucas next to her, saw centuries of others before them, their shrieks of terror filling the abyss. No! She breathed softly before yelling. No! She dragged herself up from the ground, pulling Lucas behind her. The shadows howled, the voice raging in anger. Emma stood before the well, her heart thudding against her chest, and spoke with all the force she possessed. You do not have control over us. We choose to live. We choose to escape. Lucas stood with her, his voice shaking but firm. We refuse you, he declared. We won't look. We won't hear. The shadows twisted and collapsed, the form up by the well dissipated into mist. The voice howled, a shriek of anger and desperation, and the whirlwind slowed, the forms within it losing substance. Emma felt the tug falter, the air grow light. The forest started reassembling itself, the trees hazy before they materialized fully, their branches no longer a prison. The stones of the well cracked, and the moss fell away, and the darkness retreated like a tide. The voice wasn't finished. It surged once more, a whisper this time, soft and treacherous. You will return, it told me. You always do. Emma pushed it aside, taking Lucas with her away from the well. The darkness disappeared, the shriek silenced. The forest stood still, the light of the moon shining, the path they'd taken clear. They sprinted away, not glancing back, the well receding with each step. The whispers vanished, but the echo lingered within Emma, a chill in her chest. They reached the fringes of the forest as the dawn crept in, the sky a rose and gold color. The town lay before them in the distance, its lights a beacon of safety. Emma and Lucas fell back, panting, their clothes ripped and their bodies battered. They didn't say a word, but their hands remained locked together, a lifeline against the darkness that they had outlasted. The well lay behind them, but Emma knew that it wasn't gone. It waited patiently, enduringly. She should never go back into the wood, never mention the well, but she carried its brand, a shadow in her thoughts that she knew would never depart. Lucas caught her eyes, and she saw the same recognition in his. They had escaped but not completely. As they set off toward town with the dawn breaking and the sun's rays warming their faces, Emma took a silent promise. She would live, fiercely and defiantly, and she'd never look back. The Clock's Keeper. Elias Thorne stood in the messy attic of his late grandfather's residence, surrounded by dancing dust motes and the light filtering through a cracked skylight. The scent of mildew and abandonment filled the air, and the floor creaked beneath his feet as he picked through boxes of trinkets. His grandfather, a solitary horologist, had packed the house full of clocks, their ticking a background hum that Elias had grown accustomed to ignoring in childhood visits. At 23, he stood there as a reluctant caretaker, sorting the estate out as if trespassing on a stranger's existence. Among the boxes, he discovered a strange object covered with a tattered velvet cloth. Unfolding it, Elias found a small, intricately decorated clock, no bigger than a pocket watch but more substantial than it appeared. Its brass case was inscribed with riddle-like emblems that changed when one looked at them from any angle. The ivory-colored face had black hand-painted numerals and a lone hand that vibrated slightly, as if it were alive. Different from the other clocks in the house, this one never rang. Its mechanism remained dormant. A small key stuck out of its side, inviting one to turn it. Elias paused. Something in the clock felt amiss, like a murmur in an unfamiliar tongue. But curiosity prevailed. He turned the key, anticipating a tick or a tinkle. Instead of that, the air around him condensed, and the attic dissolved. His stomach dropped as if he'd leaped from a high place, and when the world stabilized again, he wasn't in the attic. He stood amidst a crowded street, the wind biting with the smell of coal and the dung of horses. Top-hatted men and long-skirted women hurried by with smudged faces. Carriages rumbled across the paving stones, and the gas lamps flickered even in the light of the day. Elias's modern attire attracted curious glances, and he gripped the warm clock in his hand. The one hand of the clock pointed towards a number it never had before, 1893. Panic overcame him. He turned the key once more, eager to get back, and the world vanished once more. When he opened his eyes in the attic, he was gulping for air. The skylight remained cracked, the boxes undisturbed. But a stranger's eyes stared back at him in a reflection in a mirror nearby. A reflection of his own eyes, but empty, as if something essential had remained behind in 1893. He lay awake that night. The clock on his nightstand wasn't ticking, its silence pounded loudest of all. In his sleep, he saw the street and faces staring back at him with accusation, mouths opening but issuing no sound. Waking up with a pain in his left hand and a thin scar around his wrist he had not previously had. It was a coincidence, he rationalized. But the symbols on the... He struggled against it for 3 days, immersed in sorting his grandfather's things. But the clock beckoned to him, its existence a burden in his head. On the night of the 4th, he couldn't endure the questions it prompted him with, and he wound it up again, placing the hand on a new digit, 1921. The attic disappeared and reappeared as a smoky jazz club with people and the rattle of glasses. Elias wove through the crowd, unseen to all but one woman. Her eyes resembled his reflection, void of substance. She spoke something he couldn't make out before the world tilted and he was returned back in the attic. The repercussions this time were instantaneous. His eyesight faded and then refocused. His left arm felt as if it wasn't his when he looked at it again. The scar on his wrist had darkened and a muted ticking resonated within his ears, even though the clock kept silent. Elias gazed at it with a thudding heart. He longed to smash it, throw it into the wall, but his hands wouldn't respond. The ticking had become a part of him, or he a part of the ticking. He had buried it in a box and promised himself that he never again would lay eyes on it. But as he cleared the attic, he discovered a notebook written in his grandfather's hand. The entries were hasty with warnings of the clock's hunger. "It eats apart each time," one of them read. "It holds you until you're nothing." Elias's grandfather had used one too, and the last entry on the last page read, "I cannot go back." Elias's breath halted. He rummaged in the box, pulled out the clock, and examined it. The symbols writhed as if alive, creating a configuration that sent a shiver running through him. They were not ornamentations, they were a prison. And he was trapped. Elias sat cross-legged on the attic floor, the clock nestled in the curve of his palm like a hummingbird. The journal lay nearby, its yellowed pages brittle. His grandfather's words cycled in his head. "It keeps you until you're nothing." It had to be madness, he told himself. The raving of an obsessive man. But the scar on his wrist, a raised angry scar, told a different tale. So too the ticking within his ears, a faint but insistent noise, a heartbeat that wasn't his own. He hadn't slept for 2 days. The clock's existence was a weight, an instruction. He had attempted to lock it away in a trunk, but the ticking increased its volume, thrumming throughout the house until he took it back. Now he gazed at the digits, each one an entryway to a forgotten past he couldn't grasp. The lone hand shook, its fingers stuck at 6 o'clock, suspended. He knew he should desist. Visiting 1893 and 1921 had altered him in ways he couldn't account for. His left arm moved as if weighed heavily, as if it remembered the smoke-scented air of the jazz club. His dreams no longer belonged to him, full of faces gazing blankly past him, eyes like pits. But the clock promised answers. Perhaps if he unraveled its secrets, he might undo what it had wrought. He flipped the key with his thumb, the hand winding forward to 1955. The attic disappeared around him, and he stood in a diner, its chrome counters shining under the glow of fluorescent lamps. Jukebox music played overhead, and teenagers giggled over milkshakes. Elias stood out in his modern clothes, but no one paid any heed. He was a ghost among these people, or worse. The heat of the clock in his pocket seeped into his chest. He roamed the diner for a sign, a clue as to why the clock had brought him there. A man sat in a booth alone in the far corner, his hands shaking as he drank his coffee. Their eyes collided, and recognition flared. The man's face was gaunt, his skin paper-thin, but his eyes accused, keen. "You shouldn't be here." He breathed softly over the din of the jukebox. "It sees you." Elias stiffened. The diner faded before he could speak, and he found himself once again in the attic, panting. The ticking in his ears grew louder, a sound that beat with his heart. His left arm felt numb, and when he rolled up his sleeve, the scar extended, running up his forearm like a tendril. Worse still, the reflection of the attic mirror revealed a dark shadow behind him that disappeared the moment he turned around. He opened the journal in desperation. His grandfather had written of the keeper, an entity bound up with the clock. "It watches on the other side," one passage read. "Each journey nourishes it." Elias's stomach twisted. He had a vision of the old man in the diner, his warning. Had that been his grandfather in a different time? Or something else using his face? Elias attempted to get rid of the clock. He drove an hour out to a lake and stood on its edge, prepared to hurl it into the water. But when he stood there, the ticking filled with a cacophonous roar that sent him to his knees. The clock is in his hand once more, even though he couldn't recall that he picked it up. Trembling, he drove back home, a shadow looming in his periphery that is becoming more distinct, a faceless silhouette. He dreamed that night of 1955. The diner stood empty, lights flickering. The old man sat at the counter, but something was wrong with his face, stretched as if pulled by hands unseen. "You can't go anywhere," he told Elias in a whispering voice. Elias awoke screaming, his left arm afire. The scar extended up to his elbow and his hand creaked into movement of its own, reaching towards the clock. He struggled for hours, but the ticking was unbearable, a command he couldn't resist. Winding the clock, he set it for 1972. The attic disappeared, instead revealed a wet street lined with neon lights. Passers-by rushed by with umbrellas over their faces. Elias felt observed, not by them but by something overhead, something beyond. The clock throbbed, and he saw a shadow materialize in the rain, standing as high as the buildings, its edges frayed like smoke. He turned the key back around, but the movement was reluctant, as if the clock itself were fighting it. Back in the attic, his left arm dangled lifelessly. The scar throbbed with a cadence that kept pace with the ticking. The last pages of the journal were empty, but as he looked, Words began to appear in his own hand. "It's coming for you." Elias no longer knew his left arm. The scar crept past his elbow in a twisted design that glowed softly in the dark. His hand acted of its own accord, gripping the clock even as he attempted to loosen it. The ticking in his ears pounded relentlessly, a drumbeat that suppressed his thoughts. The attic seemed smaller, its walls closing in on him, and the figure in his perception no longer a fleeting thing. It stood there, a tall figure with no face that hovered just out of reach. He hadn't left the attic in days. Food and sleep felt like a long time ago, replaced by the demands of the clock. The journal provided no answers of its own, its pages stained with his handwriting, but he had no recollection of writing. "You belong to it," one of them read. "Time is its prison." Elias felt the urge to burn the journal, the clock, the house, but his body wouldn't let him. The clock lived, or something within it lived, and it yearned for him to continue. He rewound it once more, not able to resist. The hand pointed to 1938. The attic disappeared, and he stood in a factory filled with oil and metal. The workers moved like robots, faces blank as they ran the machines that screamed. Elias felt the heat of the clock, a flame in his chest. He looked for sense, for an escape, but the workers paid no mind. None but one. The apron-clad young woman looked up from the machine. Her eyes were the same as the others he'd encountered, hollow and bottomless. She pointed at him with a shaking finger. "You brought it." She spoke over the cacophony of the factory. The machines ground to a halt, and the workers shifted, their faces dissolving into darkness. Elias gripped the clock, spinning the key, but the transition was slow and reluctant, the factory resisting. In the attic, he fell, his left arm immobilized. The scar extended up to the shoulder, and his reflection revealed a stranger's visage with his features softening toward the edges. The shadow drew closer now, its shape more defined, but still faceless. It remained stationary, but Elias knew its eyes fell on him, its eyes being heavy and ancient. The ticking had disappeared from his ears. It was within him, in his bones. He attempted to break the clock, driving it against the floor. Brass dented, but the machinery hummed on, intact. The sigils glowed and the shadow drew closer, its darkness a chill weight. Elias screamed, but the ticking consumed his voice. The pages of the journal turned alone, a drawing of the shadow with "The Keeper" written below it in his grandfather's hand. "It waits until you're empty." Elias's mind splintered. He saw glimpses of 1893, of 1921, of 1955, of 1972, the moments he had lived and the moments he had not. He stood in the factory once more, then in the diner, then on the street, the images spilling into each other. The shadow lurked in each of them, observing. And he knew the truth. The clock wasn't taking him back in time. It was drawing him into its world, one in which time was a snare. He twisted it one final time, frantically seeking freedom. It was 1964. He stood in a suburban neighborhood, with white picket fences running along the houses. Kids played in the road, their laughter reversed, like a record turned around. Elias sensed the shadow that closed in behind him, closer than ever before. And he ran, but the road circled back on itself, leading him back to the same place. A boy on a bike reined in his bike, his eyes empty wells. "You cannot go back," he told him, and the world unraveled. In the attic, his left arm disappeared. Not physically, but it wasn't his anymore. It moved of its own accord, winding the clock against his will. The scar on his chest throbbed with the ticking. The shadow hung over him, its outline nearly substantial. Elias cried out in realization. The clock wasn't his. It was he that belonged to it, to the creature that inhabited its gears, the keeper that fed on his life. The last page of the journal contained a message, written in blood. "You are its now." Elias attempted to get up and run away, but his body felt weighted, as if time itself bound him. Walls of the attic sparkled with visions of other years and lives trapped there. The shadow inched closer, and Elias began to dissolve, his memories unraveling as thread. Elias wasn't whole anymore. His left arm, a stranger's arm that replaced the one that once belonged to him, acted of its own volition, its scar beating as a second heart. The ticking echoed within his head, a monotonous beat that obliterated his thoughts. The attic trapped him with walls of other periods of time, streets, factories, diners, all the places he'd been as well as all the ones he couldn't escape. The shadow, the keeper, waited just beyond the periphery of his sight, its faceless stare a force crushing his soul. He had no recollection of life before the clock. His childhood, his grandfather's visage, even his own name, these were shadows, evanescent and indistinct. The journal remained his anchor, but its pages a reflection of his descent into confusion. Words materialized and disappeared, in his hand, his grandfather's hand, someone else's hand. "You are the key," one of them read. "You are the lock." Elias had no way of interpreting it, but the words seared themselves into his mind as a truth he couldn't shake. The timepiece rested in his lap, its brass warm against his skin, its symbols vibrant with life. He had tried leaving it behind, destroying it, but it kept coming back, its ticking louder, its pull greater. The keeper waited patiently for him to give up. Elias could feel it in his marrow. With each journey into the past it fed on him, eroded little pieces of himself away until there was nothing left. He was emptying himself out, becoming a shell for the creature contained within the clock. He rewound it again, not because he desired to, but because he had no other choice. The hand pointed toward 1987. The attic disappeared, and he stood in a mall, its neon lights humming, its air filled with perfume and popcorn. The teenagers laughed, their voices ringing out, but their faces incorrect, their eyes too huge, their smiles too broad. Elias walked among them, a specter in a world that wasn't his. The clock smoldered, its heat a bond that kept him fixed in this location. At the heart of the mall lay a fountain that sprayed water that flowed too languidly, as if time itself grew weary. A man stood there with his back turned toward Elias. He turned around, and Elias gulped. It was he himself, but older, with gray hair and creased face. "You cannot stop," the man told him in a voice that was his own but icy. "It owns you." The man's eyes had turned dark as the boy's in 1964, as the woman's in 1921. The eyes of the keeper. Elias sprinted, the mall stretching out into infinity. He turned the key, but the movement was torture, as if the clock struggled to hold on to him. Inside the attic, he screamed, his throat raw. His left arm a marionette's, turning the hand of the clock toward a new numeral. The scar across his chest, its configuration a chart of his fate. The keeper stood firm now, a monolith of smoke and darkness, its essence an abyss that devoured light. The pages of the journal bleed ink that wasn't ink, words that weren't words, symbols that echoed the clocks. Elias knew, but he did not want to. The clock was not a tool. It was a door, and the keeper stood beyond it. Each passage opened the door wider, allowing the keeper closer. His grandfather had known and had attempted to warn him, but the clock selected its keepers, and Elias had been selected. He saw them there, in the glimmering walls of the attic, the others who had kept the clock. A woman wearing a Victorian skirt and hairstyle, her eyes locked in terror. A man dressed in a soldier's uniform, his fingers digging into something that wasn't there. A girl with blank eyes. They were stuck there with him, their lives ravaged by the keeper. Elias heard their screams, their desperation, a cacophony that merged with the ticking. He struggled to fight, to recall who he used to be. He mouthed his name, his mother's face, the scent of the rain. But the memories escaped, taken over by the rhythm of the clock. The keeper approached closer, its body nearly human, but its face a blank. Elias felt its reaching not for his body but for the remnants of his soul. The hand of the clock moved of its own accord, to a new number. Elias pleaded with it to halt its movement but had no voice. The attic disappeared from around him, and he found himself standing in a 1999 city street bathed in sodium light. The keeper stood among the throngs of people, its outline breaking across the buildings as its shadow. Elias knew that it was all over. Elias was not a man but a part of the clock, a cog in its never-ending machine. Elias had left, or almost. His body lay in the attic, but not his. The scar wrapped around him, a lattice of shimmering lines that throbbed with the ticking of the clock. His left arm, his chest, his face, all the keeper's, the creature that resided within the heart of the clock. The attic had become a threshold space, its walls a tapestry of suspended moments. Faces appeared in the darkness, his grandfather, the woman of 1938, the boy of 1964, all keepers, all devoured. The clock lay in his palm, its brass melted, its markings a tongue of captivity. The ticking a heartbeat, his breath, his life. Elias saw the keeper plainly now, not a shadow but a figure that filled the attic with its presence, its form a contradiction human yet enormous, substantial yet amorphous. Its face an empty space, but Elias felt its eyes, boundless and ravenous. It wasn't speaking but its intent a compulsion, win the clock, go deeper, give in. He couldn't even recall why he'd struggled. The diary was dust, its forewarnings irrelevant. His past life before the clock was a fantasy, a deception. He was the clock's guardian, its carrier, its key. The digits glowed with an otherworldly light, each one a guarantee of oblivion. He wound the clock with a mechanical movement, his movements carried on autopilot. The hand read 1912. The attic disappeared and he stood aboard a ship, its deck creaking beneath his feet. Wind hit his face with a cold blast of salt and terror. People rushed by, their shrieks lost under the creak of metal. Elias recognized this world, the Titanic, seconds before the disaster. The clock glowed with heat, a beacon drawing the keeper. He saw it in the horde of people, its empty face gazing as people scrambled for lifeboats. It wasn't there for them. It was there for him. Elias attempted the key, to go back, but the clock resisted. The lights on the ship began to flicker, and the keeper drew nearer, its existence a tide drawing on his soul. He saw the others, the keepers of the clock, on the deck. Their faces were his, their eyes empty. They spoke as one, their voices the ticking. You are us. We are it. The vessel rolled beneath him and he rolled with it, not into the water but into time. He found himself in 1893, 1921, 1955, 1972, 1999 all simultaneously. The keeper dwelled within each era, its existence unfolding as Elias dissipated. The truth had become clear. The clock did not journey with time. It devoured it and took him with it. Each excursion stripped away his life, nourishing the keeper until he was a mere specter within its emptiness. He returned to the attic, or what remained of it. The walls had vanished, giving way to a boundless gray. The clock resided within him, its works within his chest, its ticking beating as his heart. The keeper loomed before him, its empty face mere inches away. Elias began to unravel, his memories, his name, his soul melting into the beat of the clock. He screamed, but there was no voice, there was just ticking. The rest of the keepers closed in around him, their bodies fraying like smoke. They extended their hands towards him, their hands cold, and their faces reflections of his own. "You cannot go back," they exhorted softly, and Elias knew they spoke the truth. He wasn't stuck in the past. He was stuck in the clock, stuck in the keeper's time, a realm in which moments were taken and souls detained. The hand of the clock turned, touching no digit but eternity. Elias watched as his life, his grandfather's life, all the lives of the keepers unwound into the keeper's abyss. He wasn't Elias anymore. He wasn't human. He was part of the clock, a note of its eternal melody. The attic, the house, the world disappeared. Nothing but the clock stood, its brass shining in the gray. The keeper vanished, or perhaps it permeated all things, its hunger fulfilled. The ticking grew slower, and then ceased. In the silence, everything stood still, everything breathed not. The clock waited with its cymbals beating, poised for the next keeper. Somewhere else, in a different attic, another hand would discover it. And the process would repeat itself.